tonight is about becoming a consultant. And Ed Cortas has been working with us on these presentations and will be the main presenter. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Ed, who's going to talk about the logistics for this evening's program. Ed?
Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you all again for inviting the center and myself into this endeavor. It's very meaningful work for me, for the organization to be a part, even in this small way, of the incredible work that you're doing. And it's certainly personally very meaningful and an honor for me to participate as well. So thank you very much. All right, thank you, Mitchell. So among the topics that the cohort was interested in was about consultancy. And the idea is that we have a lot of skills, we have a lot of experience. Is there a way that we can be of greater service to our communities in providing those services wider than just in our job? And can we do that through consultation? So Mitchell and the other leaders in the program asked, can we put together something that would help people think about how to approach that? I myself have been a consultant formally for almost 7 years now, probably 10 to 15 years, all total, counting sort of the informal pro bono on the side stuff. And here are some ideas that I have found helpful as I've considered my own consultancy, and I hope they're of some use to you. What we'll be covering is just some general considerations, some thoughts on how do I get started as a consultant, just a word about staying relevant, which is incredibly important as a consultant. And if there's time at the end, I'm hoping just a quick personal brainstorm as you think about how you might be interested in your own consultancy. So, you know, like a lot of things, they come in threes, right? And I think good consultancy has three components. Certainly skills, knowledge, and experience, right? If you don't have those, you don't really have anything to share. You have to be able to share that with somebody. There has to be some opportunity for you to be a consultant out there. There has to be a market, in other words. And then you have to have some passion behind it. You have to really believe in what you're doing. So obviously the sweet spot there is that part where all three overlap, right? Your skills, your opportunity, and your passion. If you don't have all three, it's really hard to do meaningful consultancy. So, you know, clearly if there isn't an opportunity, you can have all the skills in the world and you can have all the passion about the work, but if there isn't an opportunity, if there isn't a market for what you're doing, then you're not going to find the work. If you have a lot of passion and there's a market out there, but you're really trying to consult in an area you don't know very much about, you're not going to do it very well. And folks will figure that out. And then you're going to be back over here in that no work category again. And then finally, and I think what I have found really important is you can have the skills and the knowledge and you can have the market and the opportunity. But if you
no, but they can't.
I'm sorry, was there a question or? Okay. You can have the skills and the opportunity, but if you don't have any passion for the work at all, it's not going to be life-giving. And so it's not going to be a sustainable, option for you. Good consultancy is hard, and you have to be able to find the joy and the passion for it. So let's talk a little bit about what those three areas look like, and what I would say are the things we have to sort of reflect on as we consider those things. First of all, skills, knowledge, and experience. This is an area of what I'll call self-assessment. You know, what do you know, right? Not just your formal knowledge, not just your formal training. A lot of what we bring to the work is our experience, both our personal life experience and also our experience in the fields that we practice, right? What do we know? What do we know? Can we articulate that? What are the tools and processes that we are familiar with? What are the facilitation skills? Do we have ways of measuring outcomes? Think of all of the tools and processes that you know well. Make a list of those as well. Think about your talents, right? What do I do well? What comes naturally to me? Am I a good listener? Am I a good writer? do I have a knack for organizing ideas? Can I look at a wall of flip charts and glean the meaning from those and organize it in a way that communicates the ideas to other people? Am I good at organizing people? Have I done a lot of community organizing work to help people understand what their skills and abilities are and apply those? What are my talents, right? What do I know? What are my talents? And then something that I didn't realize at first, but I grew into, is what are the philosophies or the approaches am I going to employ? And this is really linked to what you believe and value, right? So maybe you really believe that the best solutions come from the grassroots. The best work is done by community-based organizations where the work comes up from the bottom, right? Well, you're going to want to approach your consultancy with that same sort of philosophy. How you consult ideally should be aligned with those beliefs, so it comes to you naturally and you can really leverage those skills and talents, right? Maybe you're a top-down person, right? You're a hierarchy person. You believe that's how the work gets done. Well, that's going to affect your approach to consulting as well. So some self-assessment: what do I really believe about community? What's my theory of change? And how is that going to affect my consulting? And what will be my professional orientation? So we've all worked with all kinds of consultants, right? Some folks come in, they've got expertise, they come in, they analyze the situation, and then they lay out solutions. You should do this, you should do this, you should do this, right? So that's one approach, and we all know consultants who work that way. Others are more of a facilitator, right? And maybe they believe that the wisdom's in the room. And so really, the job is really to facilitate solutions, to bring people to a certain place, not to come in as the expert, but come in almost as a midwife or a facilitator to help the folks in the room move to where they need to move. So what orientation best is comfortable to you, and to articulate that. So this is the self-assessment piece. We look at the opportunity, and this is all about, the second area is all about your market, right? So can you be very clear about who you intend to serve with your consultancy? What sorts of organizations or individuals, and who won't you serve, right? For me, my whole career has been in nonprofits. I have neither the interest and probably not the skill to deal with the for-profit sector, even though a lot of what I know is transferable. But I'm very clear, I'm going to serve the nonprofit sector. And then once you figure what your general market is, are there segments within these markets that have different needs, that need different approaches? So how I work with a startup nonprofit versus one that is fully mature and is actually ready to rethink its mission are very different approaches, are very different markets, have to have very different skills and very different quote unquote products to offer them, right? Do I understand the need within my market? So, everybody's all about hard data, right? We have, particularly in marketing, right? I know a marketing fellow who said, in God we trust, but everyone else needs to bring data. Data is important, you should have that too, but do not discount, as you think about your markets, your own experience with the markets and the stories that come along with that. To really understand where you want to consult and to understand that market, you need all three. You need all three. So spending some time doing some research around the data, about what the market you intend to operate in, what are their needs, and then what your experience is with that, articulating that, very important. And do you know who else is working within your market, right? So there are other people that have very similar skills, abilities, desire to consult, may have very similar approaches, right? May have very similar services, right? Well, they're your competitors. If a useful sort of exercise is to look at your competitors and say, but what do I offer differently? What might be my twist on this? What might be my take on that? How can, in marketing terms, how can I differentiate myself? What is my specific approach to those things? But you will have competitors, right? But it's also worth looking at your market. Who are folks that offer complementary services as well, either in terms of subject matter or approach or style? These folks then become your partners, right? They're people that you can work with alongside of to provide even a richer consulting experience to organizations. So the idea to do research around the opportunity and to understand your market. And then finally, the passion piece, right? And this is more about reflection and soul searching than anything else. But just, I would say just as important, right? To spend some time thinking, what do I want for these organizations that I'm working with? What do I really want them to be able to do? Which is really just another way of asking, what do I want them to be able to do for the people they serve that are important to me, right? So as consultants, typically, whether we're working with individuals or organizations, ultimately, what we're trying to do is get them in a place where they can serve the people that we really care about most efficiently, most effectively. So what are those, do some reflection about what do I want for those organizations? Where do I want them to be? What do I want them to be after having worked with me, right? Go a little bit deeper and really what's my own desire? Right? When we start thinking about organizations and who they serve, it's a small step to what do I hope for these people, right? Can my work be a genuine expression of who I am and who I care about? I think, I say this about passion in general, but certainly about heart's desire. I think the best consultancy comes out of a real passion that's based on what we really, really care about, right? Because if you're not there, then you're not going to get to this point about what gives you life, right? So consultancy can just be a job, and you can just sort of do it. And we've worked with consultants, and we kind of get the impression that that's how they approach the work. But can you find life in it, right? Can you be exhausted by the work and energized at the same time? So frequently I give an all-day Saturday retreat, for instance, to a board of directors. And at the end of that afternoon, I'm beat, I'm exhausted. I can't put two coherent words together. I get in the car, and as I'm driving home, I call my wife to ostensibly tell her that I'm on my way home. But what comes out of me is all of everything that happened in those 6 hours. And I'm talking faster than I'm even talking at you now, with excitement and the like. Even though I'm dead tired, I'm incredibly energized. And my wife is very patient and just listens to it. But that's something to pay attention to, right? Can you be exhausted and energized by the work at the same time, or are you just exhausted? And consultants who are not fed by the work aren't as effective and don't stay in the business very long. And then finally, and this is the hardest part, can I find in this work an abiding joy and a sense of fulfillment, whatever happens at the end, right? If our consulting is based on solely on success, and we're not going to really feel, we can be disappointed in an outcome. We can be disappointed in how something didn't work out. But in the end, if we lose that sense of deep down, yeah, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing, then maybe this isn't the work for us. There has to be a real sense of fulfillment, even if the outcome is poor. Even if the outcome is poor. Remember, you're dealing with individuals and groups of individuals, and you cannot control everything. So the act itself has to be really rewarding, I think, to be a good consultant. All right, so let me stop there for a moment before I go on to the next. Any questions about those pieces?
Ed, I will let you know we have several of our fellows with us this evening, so they may very well have some questions. I mean, I think getting from square one to square two is something someone had pitched to me. How do you just take that next step? How do you know how to charge and fees, and do you need a mentor to guide you, to lead you into consultancy work, or just what?
All right, that's coming up next. Perfect segue, Mitchell. All right, so how do you get started? First of all, it's defining that sweet spot, right? So figure out what your area and your subject and your content of your work is going to be, what your theoretical approach is going to be, and what services you're going to offer, right? And package that. I knew a vice president for a large multinational corporation who I had the pleasure of consulting alongside for a time. He was a VP of Human Resources, and he could have done a lot of things after he retired to consult. Human resources is a huge field. He spent 3 months just thinking about everything we just thought about. Where's his passion? What does he really know? He developed his own approach to team building and organizational design based on structure, based on culture, based on strategy, and assembled processes, assembled the forms, all of that, and really defined his package so he knew what he was taking to market. So to do those pieces, and then you have to figure out your fee structure too. I wish there was a magic term for that. I know in this market, you can probably charge in Louisville. You can probably charge anywhere from 100 to 250 to 300 an hour, depending on your background. And you have to kind of wade into that a little bit. Certainly, if you're just edging out, you may lower your fee structure or lower your fees a little bit just to be able to wade in, and then as you gain reputation and the like, be able to charge more. But that's in the Louisville market, that 150 up to 300 is pretty common. You'll find 99% of the consultants in there. As you think about what consulting you're going to do not give into the temptation to be all things to everyone. Now you might have to work around the edges of your core a little bit, right? And do things that are a little bit outside of that core just in order to get the work, right? So, but eventually you want to be known for something, right? You want to have a brand. You want people to be able to identify who, oh, he's a consultant for this. She's a consultant for that. You have this need, you need to talk to her, right? So to have that package. So what do you do with it once you have that defined? There's some different options. You can go ahead and hang out your shingle, right? And just put yourself out there, right? Probably the only folks who are going to be really successful at that are some that already have a big network, already have some notoriety in the community that they want to serve in, and a reputation, right? So those who've worked in the community and are sort of a known expert can lead very easily into consulting. If you really haven't been involved in the community very much, you're not a quote unquote name, this is going to be very, very hard to do, right? The other part of this too is depending on how much you are known in the community, you're going to require a lot of time for marketing and sales. It's just part of the gig. Putting yourself out there, and particularly around social media. I know a guy who broke into consulting, had somewhat of a reputation. He is on social media every day and on every platform, hammering it away, sharing articles, sharing thoughts and the like. It's a lot of time. And then get used to meeting folks and just meeting them and not getting the work, right? It's all part of sales. It helps if you enjoy that part of the work because it's a large part of it. The upside is you get the freedom to choose the work, to set the hours and the fees, right? So hanging out your shingle, you can just go ahead and do that. You can join a consulting group. You can look to join a consulting group either locally or nationally, right? There's some advantages in that. With a group, you kind of get the networking and the marketing that comes along with the group if it's an organization or if you team up with folks, right? There's some advantages that you get to share skills among the consultants you're working with in the group. Maybe work on some teams and some approach more easily. You may find though that your own personal approach, your own how you would do consulting might be constricted a little bit to meet the consulting group's brand, right? So you may have to fit into certain processes or certain approaches. It can be a little constricting that. You can moonlight, right? So you can either hang out your shingle or join a consulting group. You can moonlight. that allows you obviously a little of an opportunity to do that while you have a steady income in your full-time job. Obviously, however, you have a full-time job. This is over and above that, so you have to have the capacity to do that. Actually, this is kind of how I got into it, right? I had been doing nonprofit work for 25 years. A friend of mine asked me if I would sit and have dinner with a friend of his who was a CEO of a nonprofit. She had some issues. We talked through those. She said, I really need you to work with my board. And I got into it that way. And then those board members, someone heard about that, and I got asked to do something else for another board, right? This is typically kind of the safest way to edge out, is to find those sort of part-time or above moonlighting, if you will, moonlighting opportunities, and edge out in that way. The problem is that you have to watch yourself ethically, right? You want to make sure that the line is clear between where your paying job is and where your personal consulting practice begins, and to keep that line foremost in your head. For me, it was easy. I did all of my quote-unquote moonlight work pro bono. So there was never a conflict money-wise. I always did it on my own time, so it was very easy. And I was careful that, to differentiate between the work I did for my organization and for this consultancy. Interestingly, there were years ago, the Harvard Business Review wrote an article on how people switch careers, and this is actually kind of the approach most people take. Volunteer, do some pro bono work, edge in, build your name, and until you can feel like you can kind of make that jump into the next profession. The other thing I think you could consider is social enterprise, right? So this is a very familiar term now. Social enterprise. It's also known as social entrepreneurship, right? And that's the idea that nonprofits, for-profits, individual can do work that both has social returns, has social impact, but also makes money, right? So CNPE consulting, we're really shifting that towards a social enterprise, right? We're going to do good work through CNPE consulting, and we're also going to make revenue for the organization. So is there a skill, a process, a tool that you or your organization have perfected that you're really, really good at, that other organizations could benefit from? And do you have the capacity within the work in your organization to offer training about that, or consulting, to offer that to other organizations? I'll give you an example. I'm working with a social service organization here in town, a big one. They do human service work. Part of that work is case management, but they've become very, very good at case management. And so they're thinking about, is there room in our organization to actually go to other organizations that require case management and teach them our techniques for a fee? Could we have our own sort of service where we could do case management for other organizations, again, for a fee, for revenue that comes into our company? A lot of us do good work, have developed approaches that we know would benefit other organizations. So are there ways that we could actually market those through our organization to produce revenue? Sort of an internal moonlighting. The only caveat is, if you're in a nonprofit and you do this, you need the work that you would do in that area, providing direct service or consultation or whatever, would need to be within the mission of your organization, or you'll have to pay unrelated business income tax, which is not a big deal. But for instance, there was one organization that I know of, nonprofit, did a lot of event planning. They got really, really good at it, and they thought, well, we're so good at it, we could actually plan events for other nonprofits for them, charge them a fee, and then take that revenue into our own organization. Well, the mission of the organization was to accompany people as they were transitioning to dying. Event planning isn't exactly inside of that mission, but they did it anyway. Funded the organization. They just paid an additional tax on that revenue. we're hearing a lot about social enterprise, an awful lot about social enterprise. I think a lot of organizations and individuals within organizations should take a look at this to actually form a consultancy within the organization, and then you could branch out individually. You could even branch out from there. All right. Any questions on that before we get to the last piece here? Any questions? We good?
So I have a pretty quick question, if I may.
Sure.
And this is Anna L. Olson in New York. So, so by doing the consulting work pro bono while you're employed full time, basically you were just honing your skill and practicing your craft and establishing that there was, in effect, no way there would be a conflict of interest?
You know, what you would have to be careful of is that you weren't taking work away from your organization, right? So if let's take the case management piece, right? You do that really, really well, and you know other organizations do not do case management very well at all, right? Unless your organization, that is what they do, is just case management. Going and consulting and providing services that way would be an obvious conflict of interest, right? But if you're running a human services organization where you do case management as well, helping another organization learn case management or providing that service directly isn't a conflict in the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand that, but in terms of not taking any remuneration for it, was the motivation to eliminate the possibility that there's a conflict?
Well, it certainly helps, right? If you are not taking money for it, you're just doing it pro bono to gain the experience and to share your skill, that certainly does reduce the conflict. Beyond that, you'd have to really kind of look at your organizational policies and the like, right? Some organizations don't permit that kind of volunteering or moonlighting. If you were to do that, it wouldn't hurt. It certainly wouldn't hurt to check with your organization just to make sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hey, Ed?
Yeah.
I just was going to throw in there too, coming from a place where I worked for a training company and then went out on my own. I would encourage everybody to make sure that as you are transitioning, if you are going out on your own, make sure that you are very clear as you leave whose business is what. Because you don't want somebody coming back that you've been working with saying, oh, well, you know, I worked with them 10 years ago. Okay, well, that's kind of outside the parameters of what is considered competitive. I will also say, for instance, here in Louisville, if, you know, we knew a lot of the same people, right? So just because you know somebody doesn't mean that they're your customer or they're someone else's customer. And one of the things we'll talk about in our segment is knowing what those boundaries are and being able to stand your ground.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Anybody have any questions about what Leah just mentioned? Yeah, when you do kind of get to that point, you're gonna want to be very clear about and very intentional and very upfront about what you're doing with the organization you're with. For me, it wasn't as much of a big deal because the organization I left is very different from CNPE. All right, just another word. So as you are doing it, whether you're transitioning over or whether you are actually have made the jump, an important piece of of being a good consultant is staying relevant in two ways. First of all, everybody understands you have to take time to refresh and hone your craft, right? What are the latest approaches and techniques? It's doing the most interesting work. You know, if those of you who read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People years and years ago, taking that time to hone your skill, sharpen the saw, is really, really important. It's the easiest way to stay relevant. The other part that people forget, though, is that do I still understand what the needs of those who I serve are? Do I know what their needs are? Has their situation changed to the point where where what I'm offering isn't as relevant anymore? And do I understand what that need is? I think one of the things that happened for us when COVID-19 happened, how we think about planning in nonprofit organizations radically changed almost overnight, right? No one was going to sit down and do a 3-year strategic plan. They're trying to figure out how to get through anywhere from the next 2 weeks to the next 6 weeks as they try to carry out their mission, right? So how we served them as a consultant group through the center had to change. We had to develop new techniques that would address these short-term issues, right? So really, really see who you're serving, understand who they are and who they serve and how those communities are changing. It's the only way you're really going to stay relevant. You know, for those of us who do this work, it's easy to just stay with what's comfortable, and then that becomes your lens. And then you start evaluating the work in front of you through that lens, right? Well, you know, people come to you with different needs, but you perceive them by what you know best. After a while, you're just going to become ineffective if you're not really seeing their need and addressing it. It becomes ineffective for them, and eventually it becomes stale for you in a passionate sort of legal way. Any questions? All right, let's do a real quick exercise. So what I'd like you to do is think about, those of you who are consultants, this might be a review. Those of you who are considering it, just a real quick brainstorm based on what we talked about today. Oh, Rudy, you've got a question.
Yes. Hi, thank you so much for everything that you presented thus far. I'm trying to get a sense of being a consultant within your own organization. Sometimes you might be like the person that is always called on to solve other problems or challenges. Do you think that some of these skills apply to kind of like interagency consulting, essentially, like approach? Have you ever seen any frameworks like that we can use to help us do that? It's essentially adding value to who we are within our own agencies that we have.
What do you mean inside your own organization?
Yeah, inside your own organization. Yeah.
Yes, I was a consultant. The job I had before I took the one at CNBE, I was a consultant within my own organization. I would never recommend this to another organization, but my organization wanted to do strategic planning, and I have a master's degree in nonprofit administration. So when the board told my executive director, you need a strategic plan at that staff meeting, all the eyes kind of shifted over to me. And so I did. I actually served as the internal consultant to do that, to facilitate that strategic planning process. And that kind of became the thing that I did for the organization. So yes, it's absolutely possible. I think the thing to do is to keep your eyes open for opportunities where you might be able to share some of your skills, and suggest that. Certainly let your supervisors know that you're interested in helping the organization in this way. Actually, before I even started doing the pro bono work, I was doing that internal consulting, and that's how I really started learning, hey, you know, I kind of have a knack for this. I really kind of enjoy this, actually. And it was a great way to test it out without having to change a lot. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
I was thinking about as people in this group are looking at some safe ways to kind of get their feet wet versus just moonlighting it or whatnot. Just maybe talking to your supervisor or boss, or maybe you're building it within your own capacity to have that extra space, get your feet wet, and then be able to have your own company as a client when you pivot out.
Absolutely. I think that is a safe way to do it. That and it's sort of the pro bono outside the organization stuff, right? But you know, if there are folks you can talk to about it, particularly your supervisor, about opportunities along, what I would do is actually do some of that upfront work we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Is, you know, if I feel like I want to do this work, what would it be about, right? What do I offer? What do I know? What am I passionate about? Maybe even put together a little package, and then approach, you know, and if you know that that's a need within the organization, approach the leadership and say, you know, this is what I see. This is what I'd like to try. What do you think? The key is just being clear about what you want to do. Sometimes that gives us the eyes to see the opportunity. When we're not clear about what we want to do, we really don't know what we're looking at. Valerie, you have a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask like a question and a comment, because I really, really enjoy what you're saying with regards to, you know, finding your niche and your passion.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do, you know, if you're working for an agency that you happen to love and you're doing more than what you were hired for? What kind of advice would you give the folks on the call to say, hey, look, I want to stay where I am, but I'm doing more than I was hired for. I don't necessarily want to be a consultant, but I want to package what I'm doing. So I think Sean said in one of his comments, so you do get that bump, you do get that pay raise. Again, not necessarily, you know, branching out on your own as a consultant, but being appreciated where you are. So your team, your supervisor, your CEO, whatever you want to, you know, whoever you're reporting to, can see not only what you're bringing to the table, but how to make sure you monetize it fairly. And, you of course, you only know what your value is. You may think your value is one thing, but someone else may say, oh, you're not worth that. I'm not going to pay you that kind of money. So how, what kind of advice would you give the folks on the call to be able to do that and do it fairly?
Well, I have found that just barging into your boss's office and demanding that they respect you and then leaving in a huff. So let's throw that one out. I think really it is about building a case, right? And articulating it, right? You know, so in this situation, if I understand it correctly, here's what I was hired to do. Here's how I've grown in the job. And not only, this isn't stuff necessarily that I asked for, this is stuff you entrusted me with. You saw something in me in these areas, and I'm doing that work well. So let's talk about my job description. Let's talk about what you're entrusting with me, and then how can I be fairly compensated for that, either monetarily or, you know, are there other either positions or ways to shift my work that I can do some of this other work that I'm intensely interested in that isn't necessarily part of my job description, but just sort of lay it all out and just have a conversation about it, right? I think, and then I would ask, you know, what are the avenues, and then what are the barriers? Have a conversation about what are really the barriers.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have an idea of where you want to go with this. Say, this is what I'd like to do. This is how I think it fits in, whatever. And then ask, you know, be very clear about what are the barriers, so that that way you don't get put off with the sort of, oh, this is great. Let's think about that, right? Well, let's think about what's there to think about. Either we can do this or we can't. I need to know what the barriers are. Maybe it's something I have to do. Maybe it's something you have to do. Maybe it's like, you know, here's the budget. But I think building a case and being very clear about that, I think that's the starting point anyway.
Excellent, thank you.
It doesn't work out, right? I mean, sometimes the opportunity is to move on, and that's a hard decision to make. But,
Ed, can you hear me? This is Ralph.
yes, I can.
quick question for you. Just looking out into the gallery of folk that are on the call this evening, we've got a real diverse group of people. Folk who have been CEOs of organizations for 25 and 30 plus years, professionals in the community. And I know your presentation tonight has focused primarily on what the world and what the space looks like working within the nonprofit realm. I'm curious, could you point out for us, if time permits, what are some of the major challenges, particularly for folk who might wish to explore both the nonprofit sector as well as the for-profit sector? And I ask this question particularly given the fact that today, given the civic and social challenges that are out there and the needs, if you will, that exist, as well as the for-profit world, what likely are you? What likely will an individual expect to be confronted with if they try kind of moving out of the nonprofit realm into the for-profit realm? I mean, is that? And I'm not so sure there's an easy answer to that, but I'm just curious as to what your take on that.
I think I don't want to overgeneralize too much about this. I think if you are clearly in the for-profit area, and I've done almost no for-profit consulting, but I know people who try to do both. Right, there is a much larger concern with the financial bottom line. Right, so if nonprofit sector, we've got a lot of bottom lines. We've got a financial one, we've got a social one. There's a lot. There's values and stuff like that. I'm not saying that those aren't important to corporations, but in the end, a for-profit, it's about the financial bottom line. If they're social enterprise aside for a second. So I think if you're going to branch out in that area, you're going to have to spend a lot of time talking about what you bring as a consultant, how it's going to contribute to that bottom line, right? So, if say we're talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, some nonprofits who are already kind of working in that space get the value of that. Some organizations in the for-profit area where they've got other considerations will look at that and say, that sounds great, but I don't understand how that hits the bottom line. And there are ways to talk about DEI in terms of productivity and efficiency and the like. So I would say that first and foremost, be prepared and articulate how what you're presenting will contribute to that financial bottom line. That's as well as appealing to their values, appealing to who they are as an organization. Typically, you can charge more if you're working for a for-profit. That's hopeful. But I would say that's the primary one. Is that helpful, Ralph? Is that what you were thinking of?
Yes. Thank you.
Sure.
Ed, could I add something to that?
Please, Leah.
Because I do consulting for both. And what happens sometimes in the nonprofit sector is we hear things like, well, we're different. We're not for profit or we're nonprofit. I go back and I say, that's your tax status. What's your business plan? Are you trying to operate in the black? Okay, if you are, we can talk. If you are trying to have better management, okay, then we can talk. So I think sometimes if you take out what they're leaning on as a crutch and say, what are our commonalities and similarities, you will find that both want the exact same thing. They are just going about it in slightly different financial ways.
You have to know the language though, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to talk in language that they will hear. That's a great point. And I think, no money, no mission, right? And so those of us who've worked in nonprofits understand that you have to have a solid business plan and the like. The bottom lines are similar, but not exact. Great point. What else? Any other questions? So anyway, I would just, consider, take some time. We're not going to do it now. But, think about, what are you passionate? What do you believe in? And what do I know? And what do I do well? Those are the top 4 things. Understand your market and then put something together. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much. I hope this was helpful. And if I can be of service to you all as you think this through in any way, please don't hesitate to give me a call.